Hello, this is David with a review of the Gazelle T4 Plus tent. We had a kind of unique collection of needs that led us to this tent. There's a lot of things that I found enjoyable and like about the tent, but there are some issues that could be improved that I'll go into in this video. We bought this new from the Gazelle website in the summer of 2021. We paid the full price without any sponsorships, freebies, or incentives. This is a very large two-room tent with a kind of unique design, and I'll go into the reasons I chose this tent as part of this review. So the first thing to go over in the review of this particular tent is the size, which is really impressive. The first little red tent here is a one-person MSR Zoid 2. The next blue one is a Sierra Designs Meteor Light around 1990 or so, which is a two-person tent. The next one's a newer and larger Sierra Designs Antares, which is a 3+ person tent, maybe around 2003. And then we have our large family tent, which is a REI Kingdom 6. It weighs around 20 pounds. It's 83 square feet, plus a 29 square foot enclosed vestibule. Add the garage and poles, and it's 5 or 6 pounds more. And then that brings us to this Gazelle tent, which is in the orange bag, and as you see is massively larger than all the others. I don't think I can overemphasize the size of this tent. It's not just large, it's absolutely enormous. Here it is standing up next to me. The specs say that the collapsed size is 63 inches long, which is 5'3", and I'm 6'1". That entire collapsed length can't be shortened because almost the entire length is from the rigid poles that span the length inside. Here's what it looks like getting this tent into my Land Rover LR3, which is a 7-person 3-row SUV. As you can see, it's far wider than the width of the truck. Folding down the third row seats and stuffing it into the back, it sticks out far too far. Folding down the third row and the middle seats allows me to slide it all the way up against the back of the driver's side chair, leaving 7 or 8 inches of room between the back of the tent and the closed tailgate. It's also very large around, so it takes up a lot of physical volume in addition to the length. I built a platform in the back of the Land Rover and incorporated a tunnel to slide the tent into. That way I could pull the tent in and out without having my other belongings fall down. Part of the size issue of this tent is the weight. The specs say it's 56 pounds. I also have the footprint, which doesn't have a weight on the website, but putting the footprint on my kitchen scale shows that it's a little bit more than 5 pounds. I store the footprint inside the tent bag with the tent, so the total is 61 pounds or more if you add heavier duty stakes and tie downs and such. The main purpose for getting this tent when I did was for a very special trip with my mom. She's 86 years old at the time of this trip, and although she's slowing down a little bit, she's still gung-ho to try almost anything. The purpose of this trip was to go on a remote overlanding trip with off-grid camping when we could find it, along with some off-roading. All of this set up some pretty unique needs for the tent that we needed to take. The tent needed to have 2 rooms, one large enough to fit the 2-person inflatable pad that my wife and I have for me to sleep on because it's so comfortable and spacious. And the other room needed to be large enough to fit a large cot raised off the ground for my mother, as well as a portable commode toilet. The final necessity for this tent is that I need to be able to set it up and take it down myself without any other assistance. Of the 2 Gazelle 2-room tents that are 1-person setup, this and the T8, this one had the advantage of having only one of the D-shaped doors. I felt the large screen room door would be a much safer entrance for my mom, and so we chose this one. I won't go over the details of setup and takedown here, as I have 2 videos to cover that. I will say that as a 1-person job, it is a lot of work. It's straightforward, but it's physically difficult sometimes. On the topic of tent setup, these are the stakes that came with the tent. I used these once in the lawn in my backyard, and they bent pretty dramatically. It was pretty clear from the get-go that they would be useless, and I have lots of other tent stakes that I much prefer, so I didn't use these more than the one time on the lawn. I then left them outside for half of a Seattle summer, a very rainy fall, and half of a rainy and snowy winter, and found them on the deck to do this video. You can see there's a fair amount of rust on them, so they're clearly not rust free, although that was most definitely not a fair test. They're also not very strong. They can easily be bent in half by hand. Under no circumstances would I use these to actually stake down the tent. I would urge you to find some other better tent stakes, whatever works well for you. I have no idea if the higher quality ones that Gazelle sells are good or not, but they look certainly much better than these. So a very interesting feature of this tent is that the floor of each room is attached along the perimeter completely by Velcro and can be completely removed. The tent arrived with the floor Velcroed in, and I have never removed it. I've seen questions online from people wondering where the hub poles go in relation to the Velcro. What is inside? What is outside? So you can see here that the hub poles go in sleeves that are affixed to the outside of the tent. You can see that the tent floor has an additional hook and loop to secure it in addition to the Velcro. And underneath the tent floor, you can see the tent footprint extending past the far corner of the tent. When you secure the Velcro back very carefully along the strip and carefully around each pole, you can get a quite secure seal around this corner. This is one of the interior tent floor corners where the tent floor meets the center divider of the tent, and this also has a secure corner, although only with a single pole. You can see here that when you attach longer strips of Velcro floor back onto the side of the tent, sometimes you can have small gaps form from wrinkles or folds in the Velcro, which lead to potentially gaps being left in the Velcro. The issue with potential gaps is more of a concern on the screen room side, because as you see here, the vertical pulls on each side of the screen room door extend straight through the Velcro connection. This Velcro has to be open and closed every time the tent is set up and taken down so that the pole can go through this gap and into the sleeve, which leads more of a chance to leave a gap. In addition, the Velcro extending to the right of this frame continues underneath the screen room door itself, and so large pieces of Velcro are pulled apart and stuck back together every time the door is open and closed, which leads to potentially more problems. I think it's this type of gap in the Velcro seal that leads some people online to comment that the tent is not actually sealed from insects and ants and such. In fact, the Velcro underneath the screen room door is one of my main criticisms of this tent. Every time you go in and out, you have to tear Velcro, which is noisy. It always attaches unevenly, and so if you want a good seal, you have to be very careful and deliberate about it, otherwise there are gaps in the bottom. Another one of the issues is that even if you put the Velcro back very carefully, as in this example, the length of the Velcro never seems to match up at the midline of the tent where the zipper closes, so that for whatever reason I always ended up with a gap with extra floor that ended up with a bulge and a hole in the tent. You can see what I mean in this example where my finger is poking through the bulge in fabric. It's through this gap that a chipmunk entered the tent on our last trip and tore into some things. Another funny thing about the door is that in order to stake down the tent completely, such as in heavier winds, there's a loop and stake on the right side door panel, as you see here. When that is staked down, you can only use half of the door. I don't mean to harp on issues with the door, but you can see the zipper going all the way down to the Velcro seal on the inside. you can't zip past that from the inside, but from the outside you can zip it farther all the way down to the ground. Here I zip it to the ground and then go back inside, and you can see that you can't even reach the outside zipper from the inside without undoing the Velcro. These might seem like minor things, but sometimes I was zipping my mom in and out of the tent because of these things. So this next section of the review is kind of interesting and a potential safety issue that I want to go through in some detail. The tent, as you see it set up here, was the exact spot that we ran into some issues with wind. This is at Murphy A Campground on the top of Murphy Hogback on the White Rim Road in Canyonlands National Park. This is indeed a very exposed area. Although the forecast was pretty good except for some rain, we got some mild to moderate wind gusts that caused some major problems. I don't think these wind gusts would have caused any problems or difficulties with any of my other tents. The wind came in underneath the rain fly from the front screen side of the tent, as well as underneath the side flaps of the rain fly, pushing up and making the entire rain fly billow out like a parachute up above the tent. When it did this, the pressure on top of the ceiling hub collapsed the ceiling hub on the screen room downwards all of a sudden, which looks kind of like this from the inside, although this happened spontaneously without warning and with quite a lot of force. I think this diagram here sums up how this must have happened. My mom was resting on the cot inside this end of the tent when this happened, and fortunately she was not injured, although could easily have been knocked down. So during this wind, I immediately tied down every other spot I could find, which I noted here with green. These additional tie downs prevented the end of the rainfly hubs from flipping up and also prevented the rainfly from billowing out as much as it had previously. This picture is the same tent in the same location the following morning, and it made it through the rest of the rain and wind just fine. I staked it down this way for the remainder of the trip. I won't go into any more details or concern about this, although I will just point out all the spots in the instructions for setup that talk about tying down or winds. I think this was an unusual situation, but something that people should be aware of. So the rainfly and tie downs on the side of the tent have some interesting features. There's a tie down that is attached to the center hub of each of the two side panels on one side of the tent, which I have connected to the red cord here. And then the rainfly has these black elastic loops that are permanently attached. Both of these get attached to the same stake. So the way I do it is I pull the tie down attached to the hub taut, and I stretch the elastic rainfly tie down and stake them into the ground. For wind resistance, I have tied a cord to one of the loops on the center sides of the tent, and I stake that down pretty tight against the ground, pulling the rainfly tightly inward and downward to have less chance of billowing. One of my main concerns and criticisms of this tent is the weather resistance and rain resistance. Part of this is by design of the rainfly. You can see here that the rainfly over the porch side of the tent does not extend very far out and doesn't do a very good job of protecting the entrance from rain getting in. When the tent is staked out nicely and the short side is taut, that upper center curve of the rainfly does not extend beyond the footprint, and so rain drips straight down and onto the lower part of the door and zipper. Because of this, whenever there was rain, there was a small amount of water just inside that door. There's a similar issue with a smaller D-shaped door, although it's not as significant. Here is a top-down view of the rainfly staked out, and you can see that on this side as well, the rainfly does not cover the complete door panel. This is staked out pretty well, but you can see that the rainfly is not tight along here. The rainfly is loose and flopping immediately above the door, which will send drops of water down as well. So about that D-shaped door, there is a rain flap over the top of the tent portion of the door on the outside, and then the rain flap for the bottom portion of the curve is on the door panel itself. So this junction right at the left of this video is a place where the zipper tends to get jammed up, whether you're using the upper or the lower zipper, which is kind of a hassle. I would also like to point out that this is one of the only tents I've ever owned that does not have a vestibule. So a vestibule is an extension of the rain fly that covers the ground outside of the door of the tent and underneath the rain fly, so that you have ground outside your door that is protected underneath the rain fly. This is great for going in and out of the tent without tracking wet things inside. It's a great place to store wet shoes and such. In a lot of tents, you sit down on the inside, put your feet over the sill, take off your shoes, leave them outside in the vestibule, and go inside in your socks to keep everything dry and clean inside. One of my last comments is on the tie downs for the panels on the outside of the tent. The tie downs consist of a dangling tent fabric string, as you see here on the outside, and then the underside, it's just a loop. So you can't tie two strings together. You have to use the top string, put it through the loop, and then somehow tie it or tuck it into itself. It seems like there would be a better design that would be more functional for this. So this is kind of an interesting review to summarize, because the tent overall is pretty good, but it's a mixed bag and not perfect. The size is a major issue, but I think you know that getting into buying something like this. For my use case, which was a huge 2-room tent with one person setup, it worked just fine, and it was great for our trip and was a great solution. However, if I didn't need it to be a one-person setup, I think there would have been plenty of tent options for a large tent that 2 people could set up with a much smaller size, much smaller weight, and much better weatherproofing. Having said that, you can't debate that the speed of setup and takedown that this tent offers is anything but exceptional and a huge selling point. Tent manufacturers have never been very good about including quality stakes, and so I don't know why I expected this to be any different, but it's about time a manufacturer includes very good stakes with a tent such as this, which is not inexpensive. The single Velcro strap that is included to wrap up the bundle of the tent before packing it into the bag is very nice. It works quite well, but honestly, there should be 4 of them included with the tent. The idea of people MacGyvering this up with bungee cords is kind of silly, but that is really pretty necessary to easily pack it away. So I'm not quite sure what's next for this tent in our lives. It served its purpose quite well, but I don't know if I'll have the same need again in the near future, and I'm not sure if I should sell the tent, recuperate some of my money, and look for something to replace it in the future. I really like the pop-up tent with this hub design. There are some other tent manufacturers that make similar pop-up tents, and I would be interested in those. One of the main considerations in this space would be the tents by ShiftPod. However, those are outrageously expensive, but I love the description of their thermal fabric and their reputation for being much more weatherproof and bomb-proof. However, they don't have a 2-room design unless you get into one of their massive tents and connect them together into more of a living shelter. And the ShiftPod tents seem to be much heavier as well, even than this. So I hope that all of this was helpful if you are considering buying this tent, and that you found some of these comments and my thoughts informative. If you have any questions about this tent, please post questions in the comments and we will get back to you with answers as best we can. I'd also point out that we have a video on setup, a video on takedown, and a really cool 360-degree interior view of the different spaces inside this tent.